That's a bright light. Okay, screens are over there. All right, so I'm here to talk to you about securing your pipelines. I'm not going to talk about permissions or making the pipelines themselves secure, but what you produce from those pipelines. So best practices for implementing like security scanning, things of that nature. Well, it looks like my clicker is not working. Okay. Any chance I could get a different clicker? Okay. I was already introduced, so I'm Sean Sparkman. I'm a senior consultant at Zeal. I'll have at the end of the, okay. Thank you. Let's try. Oh, I see. I didn't have it plugged in. Okay. Maybe? Gotta love technology. Who here loves technology, right? Always at a technology conference that technology goes wrong, right? Allow. Okay. That works. Thank you. That's probably just a battery problem. Okay, so I work for a great little company that's based out of Dallas called Zeal. I'll probably be up here tomorrow talking a little bit more about it. If you're interested in learning more about us, though, and you want to talk one-on-one, we do have a booth out in the sponsor area. So let's actually get into the meat of the presentation. Why is security important in your CI pipelines? So the FBI reported that $7 billion were lost in 2021 due to cyber crimes. That's a lot of money, isn't it? Right? And unfortunately, while the managers may make decisions that aren't the best for security, it typically rolls down to the engineer being held responsible. So unfortunately, that just seems to be the way it is. We've all been to the corporate training. Has everybody done corporate training at some point in their life? Right, at a corporation? I can't see. One person, two people? Oh, come on, more people than that. We've all probably heard security is everyone's responsibility. Yes? Okay. I know that's really annoying to hear, and nobody wants to hear that. But that is the truth of the matter. It is our responsibility. And it should be taken seriously at every level. Security is not a product, but a process. Has anybody heard that quote before? Is everybody here tired from lunch, post-lunch nap haze? My room's a little cold, so hopefully that'll help everybody stay awake. But security starts at the very beginning of a project and goes all the way to the end. It should be included in every part, not just in the writing of the code or the project or setting up the infrastructure. It should also be a part of CI. And it's essential. I mean, you can go under as a company. I mean, everybody likes to be paid, right? You know, you want your job. I mean, that's why we work. I got to put food in our mouths, a house over our head. You know, some of us have families. Unfortunately, 94% of companies that experience severe data loss never recover. So it is important that we take it seriously. So how do we do this? Well, one of the things that we have to start looking at is our packages. Who here uses NPM? Okay. Have you ever added a new package to your project, a new dependency? Yeah? Did you go and look at all the code on GitHub first? No? Did you check to make sure there was anything malicious in there? No? Okay. Well, even if you did you go and make sure that that package matches what's in GitHub? right? Because they could put whatever they want in there, and you wouldn't know the difference unless you actually checked it. NPM packages in the past, I don't know, like, was it 6 years ago? Maybe that's a little further. There was been discovery of malicious packages that have been used in millions of different projects. There are over millions of downloads. And it's not necessarily the thing that you add. It could be something that is somewhere up on the dependency tree, right? There's different things that they can attack that are really quite minor. And there's different vectors of attack that make it more viable, even if your production system is very secure. Things like stealing your environment variables, where you keep your credentials. They can grab your tokens, so if you have an OAuth token that you use, it sends it off to somewhere. And even as much as remote access and controlling the computer that the package is installed on. Because you are downloading code from the internet and running it on your machine. So when most of us are young enough or old enough to remember that when internet first came about, we were told, don't trust strangers, don't get into strangers' cars, don't talk to people on the internet, right? And then we had Uber, that we called a stranger on the internet to come over and help in their car, right? Well, NPM packages are sort of the same thing. I'm not saying don't use them, but just use them cautiously. And obviously, it's not limited to NPM. NuGet, Maven, all of these different package managers are vulnerable to the same kind of attacks. And even a different one is, say you've got, if you're a .NET developer, Newtonsoft, right? And everybody here knows what typo squatting is, right? Where they take a domain name, it's common misspelling, right? And they create the domain, and now anybody who types the domain name in wrong ends up on their website. Well, the same thing happens with packages. They use a common misspelling, and you type it in, and you install it, and suddenly you've got this malicious code on your system, right? Who here uses Stack Overflow? Okay, I know y'all are asleep because barely anybody raised their hand. All right. So one of the things, and even Stack Overflow has a blog article on it, is that there are vulnerabilities in their code. They've had people suggest SQL injection, and as we all know, the best answer always ends up as the top answer on Stack Overflow, doesn't it? Right? Okay, y'all are really asleep. So some other possibilities of attacks through Stack Overflow. Say, has anybody gone and found a package through Stack Overflow, and they're just like npm install package XYZ, right? And you copy and paste it, and suddenly that's in your project now, right? That's another vector of attack. So there's lots of different ways that even the most seasoned developer, DevOps engineer can possibly introduce attacks or vulnerabilities into their systems. So how do we deal with this? One of the best ways is we start with leveraging security scanning tools. There's quite a few out there. I've played with a few of them, worked with a couple. You do have to implement them in a way that works within your system because they can break the way you do stuff. And we'll get into that. It's always good to trust like these packages, but it is always important to verify. So make sure that you check out vulnerabilities and different things like that using these scanning tools, especially when adding new packages or even doing major updates. There's Sneak. I've not met anybody who's pronounced it. I've only read about it online. So they do code testing, dependency testing, and they even have an AI component. It does have command line options, so you can bring this into your DevOps process, into your pipeline. Hello, computer. Okay, Zap. So who here has used OWASP? Sorry, the light's in my eyes, so if you're raising your hand, I really can't see it. So Zap is an implementation of OWASP. Or OWASP, sorry. It has penetration testing, runtime testing, all of that lovely stuff that OWASP has. This is more for deployed projects, APIs, that sort of thing. It is free and open source, and you can run it from the command line. You can make it as part of your process, part of your DevOps process in your pipeline, and automate it as part of the release, whether it's in dev, QA, UAT, or production even. And it is owned by Checkmarx. They are a vendor out there. They're not paying me to be here. So if you want to learn more about Zap, go check them out, go talk to them. Checkmarx does have other tools out there as well. They do vulnerability testing, dependency testing, that sort of thing, reporting. In fact, we've been working with them with one of our clients and implementing that. So Vault Radar. So Vault in itself is a tool that you can keep secrets in, right? Because you don't want everybody to know your password or your API key, right? They do have an additional tool, and HashiCorp is out there. You can ask them about this and to go into more detail, called Vault Radar. It will scan your code and look for API keys, secrets, anything that shouldn't be in your code, right? You shouldn't have it in GitHub. I don't know how many times I've seen a demo where somebody left their Azure API key in there. Has anybody done that? Yeah? Did you get charged a bunch? Or you just raised your hand? Okay. It does scan for secrets. It's one of the smaller tools in this list. SonarQube. This does code scanning. So if you want to check for like SQL injection or bad coding practices that allow you to do things, because, you know, I got to register my my son, you know, Bobby dropped tables. It checks for things like that. So let's talk about what you're probably here for, is when do I do this and how do I do this? So what is an acceptable threshold? So if anybody here is a security engineer, I know I met a few of you here. So there is no system that is impervious to hacks unless you take, you know, a computer and put it in a vault and take it offline and unplug it. There's always a potential way for someone to get into a hack. So you have to remind yourself that there will always be a threshold, there will always be an acceptable threshold of what security risk you're going to take. The next question you need to ask yourself is, what stages do we scan in? One of the problems that they're running into with implementing Checkmarx is that basically the parent company has this policy that they have to run Checkmarx before they, it's part of the pull request process. It has to run through Checkmarx to get approved. You can't approve a pull request unless the Checkmarx passes. And they were behind in a particular package that would affect all of the UI for the app. And the unfortunate problem is that they didn't take that into consideration when implementing Checkmarx. So in theory, if they were going to follow best practices, they'd have to QA the entire application from top to bottom in order to update that library, which would be a part of a normal process. Does everybody test? Who tests in production? Raise your hand. Okay. So they'd have to go through and test everything in order to, you know, follow good practices or best practices. So when you're starting to implement these things, you have to consider, how is this going to interfere with my process? Am I going to be able to release features? And where in the process, where in DevOps am I going to implement it? The other thing that you need to consider is how to use the feedback. So a lot of these scanning tools, there is different levels. There's critical things. I remember running into an issue with NuGet. Recently we ran into, or I didn't, it was a different team, that a particular SQL library was behind, and Microsoft had released a critical update because there was a vulnerability in the previous version. in order to bubble that up, there had to be a report, so you need to be able to see those things. And there's different levels. So there's critical, there's important, there's warnings and information level on these different scans, especially when it comes to things like OWASP, right? So you need to make sure that if you're running these command line tools, they don't just get lost in the logs, right? So the information gets to somewhere where somebody can see it and act on it and plan around it. So something that may have been a warning, yesterday becomes a critical issue tomorrow, and now you can no longer submit pull requests, right? So you need to make sure that that feedback bubbles up to someone who can act on it. So one of the first places you can consider implementing it is commit hooks. Does anybody use commit hooks? Does anybody know what Husky is? Not a dog. I mean, it is a dog, right? So you can start off with implementing different security vulnerability checking as part of Git commits using pre and post commit hooks. One of the problems can be is the licensing. And another problem is, and I'm running more and more into this in consulting, is developers don't know how to set these things up, even if you write them a README, because they'll call you and be like, hey, Sean, I can't get this to work. My commit doesn't work, right? And then my first question is, did you read the README? And no, it's never yes. Oh, there's a README? I'm like, yeah, it's in the root of the project. How did you run the project without reading it? Well, I just put it in Visual Studio. Now, that's one of the cons. Now, one of the pros is that you're not spending so much time with your agents and taking builds. So if you've got some critical feature that needs to go out right away, it does add time to do all these scans, especially things that are more complicated like OWASP, where it's hitting endpoints and different things like that. It does add time to any kind of DevOps build pipeline. So if it's done at the very beginning with commit hooks, it's not impacting your build process as much. The next place is pull requests. So who here uses ADO or Azure DevOps? Okay, GitHub, right? Bitbucket, GitLab. So they all have their own version of pull requests, and you can add checks to it. Some checks could be just a simple compilation, which hopefully you're already doing. Anybody not doing that? Okay. You could have it run unit tests. Well, I recommend that you add some security scanning to it. You can also set things at different branches. So like if you were doing a release branch into your main branch or something of that nature, you might consider putting more scanning on it because you're now releasing this release to production and out into the wild. It's probably needs to be a little more secure than, say, what you put in dev, right? I don't really want to go into Git flow or whatever Git methodology you might use or recommend. That's not what this talk's about. So you need to consider this. This talks more about not telling you how to do it, but asking the question, right? And figuring out what questions you need to ask. So you need to think about where you want it. Do you want it in every pull request? Do you want it in, in your production to main, or your production or main pull requests, or wherever, however your Git flow works, right? I do recommend doing security as much as possible, but you do have to consider things like, is it going to block pull requests? Is it going to block development? Is it going to make things run too slowly? So if it takes like 3 hours to run, like, I heard somewhere that the unit test for Visual Studio takes 24 hours. So you wouldn't necessarily want to run every security test for, that takes 24 hours whenever you're just submitting a small feature. check, change, right? The next thing to consider is deployments. So you may or may not have your deployment separate from your pipeline. You may do releases and build pipelines in the same thing. You may have it split up. There's a million and one different ways to do DevOps, right? And I'm sure everybody here has their own strong opinion about how to do that, right? Maybe? Do we all do it the same way? Okay. Deployments, typically, you have a bundle, a release bundle, something that goes out. Maybe you're deploying the API to the environment. Maybe you've got a compiled executable that's going to go on the website for download. At that point, you can do a different type of security scan. So there's like OWASP you can do against an API. You wouldn't necessarily be able to do OWASP against code, right? So there's different tools for different things. So that is something else you need to ask yourself, what tools do I use when, right? The same tool you would use on your code is not the one you would use on your API. And the same thing with your app. If you've got a mobile app that connects to an API, you're going to use a separate tool to scan your app, whether it's an IPA or an APK or an AAB. So, like I mentioned earlier, nobody here goes and reads all the open source code for what they're including in their project. There may be vulnerabilities, and the great thing about open source is that everybody can see the code, right? And there are companies that specifically all they do is they go and they look at this open source code projects and they look for vulnerabilities. Now, typically it's only major projects. You're not going to see something with like 3 downloads that's getting researched, right? So that's something to consider. But there are companies out there that are doing that work for us, fortunately, and the way typically they're hired by these companies that do the scanning and alerting. That's one consideration. The other part, or the vulnerability in open source projects, is that sometimes these projects go dormant. The main contributors, the owners of these projects, they burn out. Like any other job, volunteer position, right? They get bored, they go on to different things in their day job, they no longer want to update the project, right? And it's happened on some pretty major projects that have dependencies across the board on NPM. And someone might come along and ask, hey, I see you're no longer doing work on this project, can I start contributing? And they do what we call social engineering, and they get onto the project and they start committing things that are good for it, and then the original owner passes it on. And this has happened multiple times. This isn't some theoretical thing. This has happened in real life. And once they have control, the keys to the kingdom, they make some malicious changes, and nobody is the wiser at first. There was an NPM project, I believe it was used for console output coloring. So you wanted to say your warnings are yellow, your errors are red, and they put a tool in there that scanned for Bitcoin wallets, right? Now, that won't be a big issue on development, but say you get that on all the developers who are working on this project, installing that NPM package onto their system. And because it's up the dependency tree, they're not going to necessarily see it. And I believe, if I remember correctly, this is one of the first NPM packages that was removed from the NPM package repository. And let's see. Now, these same vulnerabilities are not just limited to open source projects. There are closed source proprietary projects that are just as vulnerable. I mean, look at Target. Target got infiltrated through social engineering, and someone got this network password that allowed them to steal all the credit cards. The same thing can happen in Visual Studio, Windows, whatever. And we just hope that Microsoft, Oracle, all these big companies that have proprietary software is monitoring what code goes into their executables, goes out in their projects. They're not as open and visible about it, but it is still a possibility. So one of the ways that we can, be aware of this is a tool called Dependabot. Is anybody using Dependabot? Yeah? Do you like it or is it annoying? Anybody find it annoying? Yeah? There's days I like it, there's days I don't. So some of the things it can do is it can alert you that there's a new version of a package. It can alert you that there's vulnerabilities being discovered in a package you're using. And that's just some of the things you can use with it. Typically, you can set it to do is create a pull request automatically with whatever new package that it recommends, or package version rather, sorry. There's GitHub security alerts offered by GitHub. Obviously, this is a GitHub only thing that you can turn on, and it will alert you that the package you're using might have some vulnerabilities in it. It does sort of the same thing as Dependabot, but it's an alert, and rather than creating a pull request. So who here has heard of the Infinite Game? There was a TED Talk, right? And this is the reason why it's so important that everybody is involved in security, right? Is that there's all of these people that maybe they're not necessarily malicious, they're just interested, they're curious, whatever, and they're poking at your system, they're finding vulnerabilities, and they have, an infinite amount of time. There's no time limit on when they can do this. It could be tomorrow, it could be in 30 days, it could be in 30 years. If hopefully not, your system's still running in 30 years. Hopefully it's been updated to something newer and better as we evolve. But they don't necessarily have, it's not like Monopoly, right? Where there's a set goal, there's a set time limit, you go around the board. Instead, with the Infinite Game, the rules are changing. They can change the rules. But on your side, you've only got 40 hours a week. Hopefully you're not doing overtime. You only know what you know, but they're constantly poking at the system. So we, as DevOps engineers, developers, security engineers, etc., have to constantly be evolving and trying to stay ahead of all of this. So we have to be ongoing growth and adaptation. And one of the first things I recommend is going to an event like this. So everybody can pat themselves on the back. Good job coming out here and learning. That's definitely a way of growth, adaptation. Constantly learning online, doing things like Udemy, YouTube, Pluralsight, reading blogs, just seeing what new vulnerabilities are out there, right? And better ways, best practices. Oh, I kind of covered that. Okay. Another thing I didn't mention is user groups. Does anybody here go to user groups still? Okay, good. Good on y'all. Awesome. That's another way that you can continue to learn. And then finally, I hope you didn't have to memorize all of that or whatever. You can come back to me and ask me questions. I'll be out there outside. But I hope that you take away today to enhance your CI's pipeline security through integration, automation, and continuous improvement. Thank you. Do I have time for questions? Okay. Is there any questions? I may not be able to see your hand. Yes. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. A little better? Yes. So 94% of companies that have a severe breach
Don't recover.
don't recover. I mean, we all can't be, what was it, Equifax?
So,
Right.
so there we go. Okay, third bullet. So what I wanted to ask, do not recover their data or do not recover as a business. They go out of business.
They typically have severe profit losses and potentially go out of business. So
Okay, what was the source for that quote, please?
I'd have to look at my notes. I don't have it on the slide.
Okay, if we could connect later, that would be great.
Do what?
If we could connect later, that would be great.
Yeah.
Okay, super, thank you. Anybody else?
Any other questions? And obviously, you don't necessarily want to do this all at once. You want to do it progressively and small steps as you need. But definitely always be moving forward, always be improving. Okay? All right.
Round of applause. Thank you, Sean.